Elena Voss felt the bond snap before she understood what was happening. One moment she stood in the center of the Silverfang gathering hall, surrounded by hundreds of pack members, her heart pounding with joy, because the elders had just confirmed it. Alpha Daemon Kane was her fated mate. The mark on her wrist had bloomed silver the instant he touched her hand. Every eye in the hall had turned to her with a mixture of shock and admiration. A girl from a minor bloodline, chosen by fate to stand beside the most powerful alpha in the Northern Territories. The next moment, Daemon pulled his hand away. He did it slowly, almost gently, as if he wanted everyone to see the deliberate nature of the act. Then he turned to the woman standing at the edge of the platform, a woman with dark red hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. Camille Rousseau. Everyone in the hall knew her name. She was not Pack. She was not even from Silverfang territory. She was the daughter of a noble house from the eastern borderlands, a woman Daemon had kept close for 3 years, long before any bond had ever been spoken of. "I reject this bond," Daemon said. His voice carried through the hall without effort, the way an alpha's voice always did. "I choose Camille." The words landed like physical blows. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. She heard gasps ripple through the crowd, heard the low growl of disapproval from several of the pack elders, heard someone near the back whisper that this had never happened before, not in the history of Silverfang. A fated bond had never been rejected in front of the entire pack. But it was happening now, and it was happening to her. Elena's knees weakened. The bond, even freshly formed, had already begun weaving itself into her, threading through her chest, her mind, the very rhythm of her pulse. To have it severed like this, publicly, brutally, was not simply an insult. It was an injury. She felt it as a physical thing, a tearing sensation beneath her ribs, and she pressed a hand to her chest without meaning to. Camille stepped forward and looped her arm through Daemon's, resting her head against his shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who had done it 1,000 times before. She looked at Elena with something close to pity, though there was a glint underneath it that looked more like triumph. "Poor girl," Camille said, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Fate does make mistakes sometimes." Laughter rippled through parts of the crowd, though not everyone laughed. Some of the older pack members looked away, uncomfortable, unwilling to witness what was happening, but unable to stop it either. Alpha law was absolute. If Daemon chose to reject the bond, no one could force him to accept it, not even the elders, not even tradition itself. Elena stood alone in the middle of the hall. The silver mark on her wrist, which had glowed so brightly only moments ago, now looked dull, almost gray, as if the light had drained out of it along with her hope. She did not cry. She refused to give them that. Instead, she straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked out of the hall without another word. The doors were heavy, carved from old oak, and she pushed them open with more force than necessary, letting them slam shut behind her. The cold night air hit her face, and only then, alone in the darkness outside, did she allow herself to gasp for breath, her whole body trembling. She did not know it yet, but that walk out of the hall was the last time she would ever set foot in Silverfang territory as a member of the pack. By morning, the pack elders had confirmed what she already suspected. A rejected mate, especially one from a minor bloodline with no strong allies, had no place in the pack anymore. It was not written law, not exactly, but it was custom, and custom in the world of shifting packs was often stronger than law. Elena was given 1 day to gather her things, 1 day to say goodbye to the only home she had ever known. She packed quickly, taking only what she could carry: a few clothes, a small blade her father had given her before he passed, a locket, with a faded photograph of her mother, who had died when Elena was young. There was nothing else worth taking. The rest of her life in Silverfang, the friendships, the small house near the eastern wall, the garden she had planted herself, all of it would stay behind, swallowed up by a pack that had decided she no longer belonged. Word of her rejection spread fast. By the time she walked through the village center toward the outer gate, she could feel the stares. Some were sympathetic, most were not. A rejected mate carried a kind of stigma in shifter society, an unspoken suggestion that something must be wrong with her, that fate itself had somehow erred in choosing her. No one wanted to be associated with that kind of misfortune. An old woman named Greta, who had once sold bread near the square, was the only one who approached her. She pressed a small parcel into Elena's hands. Inside was dried meat, a bit of cheese, and a folded map of the territories beyond Silverfang's borders. "Head west," Greta whispered, glancing over her shoulder, as if afraid of being seen speaking to her. "There is nothing for you here anymore, child. But the world is bigger than this pack. Remember that." Elena thanked her, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. She had never been outside Silverfang territory in her entire life. The idea of walking into unfamiliar lands, alone, with no pack protection, no alpha to answer to, no allies of any kind, terrified her more than she wanted to admit. But she had no choice. The guards at the gate did not stop her. They simply watched as she passed through, their expressions carefully blank, though one of them, a young man she vaguely recognized from childhood, gave her a small nod as she walked by. It was not much, but it was something, a tiny acknowledgement that not everyone believed she deserved this. Once she was beyond the gate, the forest swallowed her whole. The first day of walking was manageable. Elena kept to the map Greta had given her, following a narrow trail that wound through familiar woods before curving toward unfamiliar territory. She told herself she was fine. She told herself the ache in her chest, the constant pull of a bond that no longer existed, would fade with time. She told herself many things to keep moving forward. By the second day, the terrain grew rougher. The trail Greta had marked ended abruptly at a ravine that had clearly not existed when the map was drawn, or perhaps had simply been forgotten by whoever first sketched these lands. Elena had to backtrack, wasting precious hours searching for another way through. By the third day, her food was nearly gone. She had never been trained as a survivalist. Life in Silverfang had been comfortable, structured, safe within the boundaries of pack protection. She knew how to garden, how to sew, how to care for pups when needed. She did not know how to hunt in unfamiliar territory, how to identify safe water sources, how to build proper shelter against the cold that grew sharper each night as she moved further from home. The bond injury did not help. Even severed, even rejected, the remnants of it still lingered in her body, like a low fever that never broke. She grew weaker each day, her energy sapped by a wound that had no physical form, but hurt just as much as one. On the fourth day, exhaustion finally caught up with her. She had been walking since dawn, pushing through dense underbrush that scratched at her arms and legs, when her vision began to blur at the edges. The forest around her, thick with ancient trees whose canopies blocked most of the daylight, seemed to tilt and sway. She reached out to steady herself against a tree trunk, but her hand slipped, and the world spun faster. She did not remember falling. She only remembered the cold press of earth against her cheek, the smell of damp soil and rotting leaves, and a distant, fading awareness that this might be the place she died. Alone, forgotten, discarded by the very fate that had once promised her a future beside an alpha who never wanted her at all. The last thing she heard, before darkness took her completely, was the sound of something large moving through the brush nearby. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, growing closer. She could not lift her head to see who or what approached. She could not summon the strength to speak, to warn them away, to defend herself in any way. All she could do was lie there, helpless, as the footsteps stopped directly beside her. A shadow fell over her face, blocking out what little light filtered through the canopy above. "Well," said a low voice, rough and unfamiliar, carrying an edge that suggested this person was not accustomed to being surprised by much. "This is not something you see every day." Elena tried to open her eyes fully, tried to focus on the figure standing over her, but her body refused to cooperate. She caught only a fleeting impression before the darkness pulled her under completely. Dark hair, broad shoulders, eyes that seemed to glow faintly gold in the dim forest light, watching her with an intensity that felt almost tangible, even through the haze of her fading consciousness. Then there was nothing. When Elena woke again, she was no longer in the forest. She lay on a bed of furs inside what appeared to be some kind of wooden structure, the walls thick and sturdy, built to withstand harsh weather. A fire crackled somewhere nearby, its warmth reaching her skin, chasing away the deep chill that had settled into her bones during her days in the wilderness. She blinked slowly, her vision still hazy, and tried to sit up. A firm hand pressed against her shoulder, gently but unmistakably, keeping her still. "Do not move too quickly," the same low voice from before said. You have been unconscious for 2 days. Your body needs time. Elena turned her head and finally got a clear look at the man who had found her. He was tall, taller than Damon had been, with a build that suggested raw strength rather than the polished, ceremonial power that Silverfang alphas often displayed. His dark hair was cut short, practical rather than styled, and a faint scar ran along his jaw, the kind of mark that came from a real fight rather than a training exercise. His eyes, which had seemed to glow gold in the forest, were now a deep amber in the firelight, sharp and watchful. "Where am I?" Elena asked, her voice raspy from disuse. "Nightspire territory," the man answered. "You are lucky my patrol found you when they did. Another few hours in that cold, and you would not have survived." Elena's stomach twisted at the name. Nightspire. Even in Silverfang, stories about Nightspire circulated among pack members, whispered warnings meant to frighten young pups into behaving. Nightspire was said to be ruled by a brutal, merciless alpha, a territory where outsiders were rarely welcomed and even more rarely allowed to leave. "You are afraid," the man observed, watching her expression shift. "I can smell it on you." "Should I not be?" Elena asked, some of her old defiance creeping back into her voice despite her weakened state. "Every story I have ever heard about this place involves violence and fear." The man's mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Stories have a way of growing more dramatic with each retelling. I would not put too much faith in them." "And who exactly are you?" Elena asked. "Are you the one they call the Dark Alpha?" Something flickered across his face, brief and unreadable. "I am Cale Ashford, and yes, that is the name most outsiders use for me, though I have never particularly cared for it." Elena studied him carefully, searching for the cruelty that the stories always described, the coldness that supposedly defined every member of Nightspire. She found none of it in his expression, only a kind of guarded watchfulness, as if he were equally uncertain about her. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "If your territory is as feared as people say, why would you bother saving an outsider you found unconscious in the woods?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to hold his gaze. "Because leaving you there would have made me no better than the people who abandoned you to that forest in the first place," he finally said. "And whatever else people believe about Nightspire, we do not leave the vulnerable to die when we have the power to help them." Elena had no response to that. She had expected many things from this territory, from this man, but not this quiet, steady conviction, so different from the cruelty and callousness she had witnessed from her own pack's alpha just days earlier. "You still have not told me why you were alone in that forest," Cale said. "A young woman, unarmed, untrained by the look of your hands, wandering through dangerous territory without any pack escort. That is not something that happens by accident." Elena hesitated. The wound of her rejection was still raw, still humiliating, and she was not ready to share it with a stranger, no matter how gently he had cared for her. "It is a long story," she said finally, "and not one I particularly wish to tell right now." Cale studied her for another moment, then nodded, apparently willing to let the matter rest for now. "Fair enough. You are welcome to remain here until you have regained your strength. After that, what you choose to do is your own decision." "Even though I am an outsider, even though your territory does not typically welcome strangers, rules can bend when circumstances demand it," Cale said, rising to his feet. He moved toward the door of the structure, then paused, glancing back at her. "Rest now. There will be time for questions later, for both of us." He left her alone with the fire and her thoughts, and for the first time since the humiliation in the Silverfang Hall, Elena felt something other than despair settle over her. It was not quite hope, not yet, but it was something close to it. A small, fragile sense that perhaps her story was not over, that perhaps the forest she had nearly died in had led her somewhere unexpected instead. She did not know yet how much her life was about to change. She did not know that the man who called himself Cale Ashford, the one others feared and called the Dark Alpha, would become the axis around which her entire future would turn. She only knew that for the first time in days, lying in a warm bed with the sound of a crackling fire nearby, she felt something close to safe. Outside, unseen by Elena, Cale stood in the cold night air, staring up at the moon with a troubled expression. He had led patrols through that forest 100 times before, had found injured travelers and lost wanderers more times than he could count. But something about this particular young woman unsettled him in a way he could not quite name. There had been a strange pull the moment he found her, an inexplicable urgency that drove him to check on her immediately, rather than waiting for his patrol to report back through the usual channels. He had told himself it was simple concern, the same instinct that made him a fair and protective alpha to his own pack. But some quiet part of him suspected there was more to it than that, something he was not yet ready to examine too closely. He glanced back toward the structure where Elena slept, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. Whatever had brought her into his territory, whatever storm had driven her into that forest alone and unprotected, Cale had a feeling it was only the beginning of something much larger than either of them yet understood. The forest had a way of delivering exactly what fate intended, whether people were ready for it or not, and something told him that this particular arrival was no accident at all. For now, though, all he could do was wait, and watch, and let the girl in his care heal in peace, unaware of the ways in which her presence had already begun to shift the quiet rhythms of his carefully guarded world. 3 days passed before Elena felt strong enough to leave the bed of furs where Cale had placed her. During that time, a young woman named Brielle, one of the Nightspire pack healers, checked on her twice a day, bringing broth, changing the dressing on a scrape along her arm, and answering the few questions Elena dared to ask about the territory she now found herself in. "You keep looking at the door like you expect someone to burst through it and drag you away," Brielle said on the third morning, setting down a tray with fresh bread and a cup of warm tea. "You do not need to be afraid here." Everyone in Silverfang spoke of Nightspire as though it were a place built entirely out of nightmares, Elena admitted. "Forgive me if old habits are hard to shake." Brielle laughed softly, a genuine warm sound that did not match the fearsome reputation Elena had expected from anyone associated with this territory. "Half of what outsiders say about us is exaggeration, and the other half is fear of things they do not understand. We are not gentle people, that much is true. Alpha Cale did not build this pack on gentleness, but we are fair. We protect our own, and we do not turn away those who need help, whatever the old stories claim." Elena thought about that as she sipped her tea. Fair. It was a word she had not associated with pack leadership in a long time, not after watching Damon reject her in front of an entire hall of witnesses without a shred of hesitation or shame. "Can I ask you something?" Elena said. "Of course. Why do people call him the Dark Alpha? Is it simply because of the territory's reputation, or is there more to it?" Brielle's expression grew thoughtful. "There are stories, as there always are about powerful men. Some say he earned the name after a conflict with a neighboring pack years ago, a conflict he won decisively, and without mercy for those who threatened his people. Others say it is simply because Nightspire itself has always carried a dark reputation, long before Cale became Alpha, and the name attached itself to him the moment he took the position." She paused, setting the empty broth bowl aside. "Whatever the reason, I can tell you this much. He is not cruel. Strict, yes. Demanding, absolutely. But cruel? No. Not to those under his protection." Elena filed the information away, turning it over in her mind long after Brielle left the room. The picture forming of Cale Ashford did not match anything she had expected when she first heard his territory's name whispered in fearful tones back home. It intrigued her in a way she was not entirely comfortable admitting. By the fourth day, Elena insisted on getting out of bed, despite Brielle's protests that she needed more rest. She managed a slow walk around the small structure she had been staying in, her legs shaky, but steadily growing stronger with each step. When she finally pushed open the door and stepped outside for the first time since her arrival, she found herself staring at a settlement far different from anything the old stories had prepared her for. Nightspire was not the grim, shadowed fortress of nightmares that Silverfang tales had painted. It was a sprawling network of sturdy wooden structures, built into the natural landscape of a dense forest region, with clear paths winding between homes, a central gathering area where children ran and played despite the autumn chill, and the distant sound of laughter carrying from what appeared to be a training yard. It was not what she expected at all. "You look surprised," a familiar voice said from behind her. Elena turned to find Cale approaching, dressed in simple, practical clothing, rather than any ceremonial garb she might have expected from an alpha. He carried himself with the same quiet authority she remembered from their first conversation, though there was something slightly less guarded in his expression now. I expected something darker, Elena admitted honestly. Given the name of your territory, and everything I had heard. Names have a way of outliving their original meaning, Kale said. Nightspire was named for the tall black stone formations that mark our northern border, not for anything sinister about the people who live here. But stories grow their own legs over time, and few people bother questioning them once they have taken root. Elena considered that as they walked together through the settlement, Kale pointing out various structures and explaining their purpose with a patience she had not expected. The training yard where young pack members practiced combat and control, the healing house where Brielle and the other healers worked, the main hall, larger and more imposing than the other buildings, where pack matters were discussed and decided. Your pack seems content, Elena observed, happy, even. That does not match anything I was told about Nightspire before I arrived here. We work hard for that contentment, Kale said. Strength and fairness are not opposites, whatever some people believe. I demand discipline from my pack, and in turn, I protect them fiercely and treat them with the respect they deserve. That balance is not always easy to maintain, but it is worth the effort. Elena found herself studying his profile as he spoke, noting the conviction in his voice, the quiet pride he clearly took in what he had built here. It was such a stark contrast to everything she had witnessed in her final days at Silverfang, where politics and appearances had mattered more than genuine care for pack members. You still have not told me your story, Kale said, glancing at her as they walked. Why a young woman with no training and no supplies was wandering through dangerous territory completely alone. Elena's steps faltered slightly. She had known this conversation would come eventually, but she still was not certain how to explain the humiliation of her rejection without reliving every painful detail of that night. I was rejected, she finally said, keeping her eyes fixed on the path ahead rather than meeting his gaze. By my fated mate. In front of my entire pack. He chose someone else, someone who was never meant to be his mate at all, and the pack elders decided there was no place left for me in Silverfang after that. Kale was quiet for a long moment, and when Elena finally glanced at him, she found his jaw tight, his amber eyes darker than she had seen them before, something like restrained anger simmering beneath his controlled expression. He rejected a confirmed bond, in front of witnesses, and then let his pack cast you out into the wilderness with no protection and no supplies? Kale's voice was low, careful, but the anger in it was unmistakable. Essentially, yes, Elena said, though I suppose I could have refused to leave. I do not know if that was truly my choice, or simply the expected outcome once the rejection happened. That is not how these matters are typically handled among honorable packs, Kale said. A rejection is a painful thing, yes, sometimes even necessary depending on circumstances. But abandoning someone to fend for themselves afterward, with no resources and no protection, that is something else entirely. That is cruelty dressed up as tradition. Elena felt a strange warmth spread through her chest at his words, a validation she had not realized she needed until she heard it spoken aloud by someone else. She had spent days telling herself that perhaps she deserved what happened, that perhaps there was some flaw in her that made Damon's rejection understandable, even justified. Hearing Kale name it plainly as cruelty helped loosen something tight and painful that had been lodged in her chest since that night in the Silverfang Hall. Thank you for saying that, she said quietly. I am simply speaking the truth, Kale replied. You deserved better than what your pack gave you. Whatever flaws fate might occasionally have in choosing bonds, the way you were treated afterward had nothing to do with fate. That was a choice made by people who valued convenience over honor. They continued walking in comfortable silence after that, and Elena found herself relaxing in a way she had not expected, given how recently she had arrived in unfamiliar territory surrounded by strangers. There was something steadying about Kale's presence, something that made the raw wound of her rejection feel slightly less unbearable. Over the following days, Elena's strength continued to return, and with it came a growing curiosity about the territory she now found herself living in. She began spending time in the training yard, initially just watching the pack members practice their combat forms, but eventually finding herself drawn closer, studying the movements with an interest she had never had the opportunity to explore back in Silverfang. You want to try? A young man named Torin asked one afternoon, noticing her watching a bit too intently. He was one of the younger pack members, perhaps only a few years older than Elena herself, with an easy smile, and none of the guarded wariness some of the older pack members still showed toward the outsider in their midst. "I have never trained in anything like this," Elena admitted. "I would probably embarrass myself." "Everyone embarrasses themselves when they start," Torin said with a shrug. "That is how learning works. Come on, I will show you the basics." Elena hesitated only a moment before stepping forward, and for the next hour, Torin patiently walked her through simple defensive movements, correcting her stance, showing her how to redirect an opponent's strength, rather than trying to match it with force she did not have. It was exhausting, and she was certain she looked clumsy and uncertain throughout most of the lesson, but something about the physical exertion, the focus required to learn something new, helped quiet the constant ache that had lingered in her chest since her rejection. Kale watched from the edge of the training yard, arms crossed, his expression unreadable as he observed Elena's efforts. When Torin finally called an end to the lesson, praising her quick improvement despite her lack of prior training, Kale approached, studying Elena with an intensity that made her suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance and labored breathing. "You have good instincts," he said. "Untrained, but good. That is not something that can be taught easily." "I do not know if instincts alone will get me very far," Elena said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But it felt good to try, to do something other than simply recovering and thinking about everything that happened back home." "Then perhaps you should continue training," Kale suggested. "If you are interested, Torin seems willing to teach you, and frankly, some basic skills would serve you well, regardless of what you decide to do, once you have fully recovered." Elena considered the offer. She had not yet decided what her future held, whether she would eventually leave Nightspire and try to build some kind of life elsewhere, or whether she might petition to remain here, in this territory that had shown her more genuine care in a few short days than Silverfang had shown her in her entire life. But the idea of learning to defend herself, of gaining some measure of strength and control after feeling so powerless during her rejection and abandonment, appealed to her deeply. "I would like that," she said. "Thank you." Over the following weeks, Elena's training continued, gradually increasing in intensity as her body grew stronger and more capable. Torin remained patient throughout, and occasionally other pack members joined the lessons, offering their own insights and techniques. Elena found herself growing closer to several of them, forming tentative friendships that felt entirely different from the relationships she had known back in Silverfang, relationships that had always seemed shadowed by pack politics and status. But it was her evenings with Kale that Elena found herself anticipating most. Most nights, after the day's activities concluded, he would seek her out, and they would walk together through the settlement, or sit near the central fire, talking about everything and nothing. He asked about her childhood, about the mother she had lost too young, about the small joys she had found in gardening and simple pack life before everything had been upended by a bond that fate apparently regretted forming. In turn, Elena learned about Kale's own past, about the difficult circumstances that had led him to become Alpha of Nightspire at a younger age than most, about the years he had spent proving himself to skeptical neighboring packs who assumed the worst about his territory simply because of old rumors and prejudices. She learned about the weight of leadership he carried, the constant balancing act between strength and compassion that defined his approach to ruling. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked one evening, as they sat near the fire, the settlement quiet around them, most pack members having retired for the night. "Taking on this responsibility, I mean. It seems like an enormous weight to carry." Kale considered the question seriously, as he seemed to consider most things. "There are difficult days, certainly. Days when the responsibility feels overwhelming, when I question whether I am making the right decisions for my people. But regret? No. This pack is my family, in every sense that matters. I would not trade that responsibility for an easier life, even if such a thing were available to me." Elena found herself watching him as he spoke, noting the sincerity in his expression, the quiet strength that seemed to define everything about him. It was such a contrast to Damon, who had always seemed more concerned with appearances and political advantage than with genuine care for those under his protection. "I am glad your patrol found me," she said quietly. "I know that probably sounds strange, given everything that led to me being in that forest in the first place. But I am glad it led me here." Kale's amber eyes met hers, something warm and unreadable flickering behind them. "I am glad as well," he said simply, and something about the quiet honesty in his voice made Elena's heart beat a little faster, though she was not entirely certain why. Neither of them spoke of it further that night, but something had shifted between them, subtle but unmistakable, a connection forming that had nothing to do with fate or bonds forced upon them by forces beyond their control. It was something they were building themselves, slowly, deliberately, choice by choice, conversation by conversation, and Elena found herself wondering, for the first time since her rejection, whether perhaps everything that had happened to her, painful as it was, had simply been the universe clearing a path toward something far better than what she had lost. Far away, in Silverfang territory, Damon Kane sat alone in his private quarters, staring at nothing in particular, while sounds of celebration drifted up from the hall below, where Camille was hosting yet another gathering with her Eastern allies. He told himself the unease building in his chest meant nothing, that he had made the right decision in choosing political advantage over an untested bond with an unremarkable girl from a minor bloodline. But some quiet, honest part of him could not stop wondering what had become of Elena Voss, whether she had survived the wilderness she had been cast into, and why, weeks later, the thought of her still lingered in his mind more than he wanted to admit. Winter arrived early in Nightspire territory that year, blanketing the settlement in a thick layer of snow that transformed the wooden structures into something almost picturesque, icicles hanging from rooftops, and smoke curling steadily from every chimney. Elena had never seen this kind of snowfall in Silverfang, where the milder southern climate rarely produced more than a light dusting even in the coldest months. Here, the world outside felt transformed, quiet and vast, and she found herself drawn to it despite the biting cold. Her training had progressed significantly in the months since her arrival. What began as basic defensive movements under Torin's patient guidance had evolved into something far more advanced, and increasingly, it was Kale himself who oversaw her lessons, stepping in whenever he noticed something in her technique that needed correcting, something that went beyond what Torin's teaching could address. "You are holding back," Kale told her one morning, as they faced each other in the training yard, snow crunching beneath their feet, their breath visible in the cold air. "I have noticed it for weeks now. There is something in you that you are not allowing yourself to access." "I do not know what you mean," Elena said, though something in his words made her pulse quicken uncomfortably, as if he had touched on something she herself did not fully understand. "During our sparring sessions, occasionally, there are moments where your movements shift," Kale said, circling her slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Faster, more precise, as if something beneath the surface briefly rises up before you pull it back down again. Have you noticed this?" Elena thought back over the past weeks, trying to recall the specific moments Kale was describing. There had been instances, brief flashes during particularly intense sparring sessions, where something had felt different, where her body had moved with a speed and instinct that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her own conscious effort. She had dismissed it at the time as adrenaline, as the natural improvement that came from months of consistent training. But hearing Kale describe it so specifically made her wonder if there was something more to it. "I assumed it was simply progress," she said slowly. "That my training was finally paying off." "Perhaps," Kale allowed, "but I do not think that fully explains it. There is something else at work, something I cannot quite identify, but which I have sensed in you since the very first night I found you in that forest." Before Elena could respond, an older woman approached the edge of the training yard, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose joints had grown stiff with age, but whose presence still commanded immediate attention from everyone nearby. Elena recognized her as Mirella, the eldest member of the Nightspire pack, a woman rumored to possess knowledge of ancient bloodlines and forgotten histories that few others in the territory could match. "Alpha," Mirella said, inclining her head toward Kale before turning her sharp gaze toward Elena. "I have been observing the girls' training from a distance these past weeks. I believe there is something you both should know." Kale's expression grew serious immediately. "Speak plainly, Mirella. What have you observed?" The old woman studied Elena for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as though she were peering beneath the surface of what she saw, searching for something hidden underneath. The girl's aura shifts during moments of physical exertion or emotional intensity. I noticed it the very first day she stepped into this training yard, though I said nothing, wanting to observe further before speaking. It is subtle, easy to miss unless one knows precisely what to look for. What kind of shift? Elena asked, an uneasy feeling settling in her stomach. I do not understand what you mean. Mirella's gaze remained fixed on her. There are bloodlines, child, ancient ones, that carry power beyond what is typical among shifter packs today. Most of these bloodlines were thought extinguished centuries ago, lost to wars and political purges during a period of history few outside the oldest families remember clearly. But occasionally, rarely, traces of these bloodlines survive, hidden within families who themselves have forgotten their true origins. Elena felt her breath catch. Are you suggesting that I carry one of these bloodlines? That seems impossible. My family has always been minor within Silverfang's hierarchy. Nothing special or noteworthy about our lineage as far as I have ever known. Hidden bloodlines often present themselves this way, Mirella said, buried within families who have long since lost any memory or record of their true heritage, sometimes deliberately hidden generations ago, to protect descendants from those who would seek to exploit or eliminate such power. It would explain the fated bond forming so strongly and so suddenly, and it would certainly explain the shifts I have observed during your training. Kale's attention remained fixed on Elena, something calculating and careful in his expression now, though not unkind. If Mirella's suspicions are correct, this could have significant implications, both for you personally and for the broader political landscape of these territories. What kind of implications? Elena asked, unease building steadily within her. Ancient bloodlines, particularly royal ones, often carry claims to territory and authority that transcend typical pack boundaries, Mirella explained. If your bloodline is what I suspect it might be, you could potentially hold legitimate claims over lands and alliances that extend far beyond anything Silverfang or even Nightspire currently controls. The weight of this information settled slowly over Elena, difficult to fully process. Just months ago, she had been a minor pack member, valued for nothing beyond a fated bond that her own mate had rejected in front of witnesses. Now she was being told she might carry the blood of forgotten royalty, a claim that could reshape entire territories if proven true. How would we even confirm something like this? Elena asked, her voice quieter than she intended. There are tests, Mirella said. Ancient rituals, largely forgotten by most modern packs, but preserved within certain old texts that I happen to possess. They are not simple, and they are not without risk, but they would provide clarity, one way or another. Kale's jaw tightened slightly, clearly weighing the implications of what Mirella proposed. What kind of risk are we discussing exactly? The ritual draws upon the deepest reserves of a person's inherent power, Mirella said. If Elena's bloodline is as I suspect, the process should reveal that power safely, allowing it to surface and be recognized. But if I am mistaken, if there is no hidden bloodline at all, the ritual could prove taxing on her body, potentially dangerous given how recently she suffered the trauma of her rejected bond. Elena felt Kale's gaze shift toward her, questioning, giving her space to make her own decision, rather than pushing her toward any particular choice. It was, she realized, entirely consistent with everything she had learned about him during her months in Nightspire. He respected her autonomy in a way Damon never had, even during the brief period when their bond had seemed destined to define both their futures. I want to know, Elena said finally, surprising herself with the certainty in her own voice. Whatever the risk, I need to understand what is happening within me. I have spent too long letting other people define my worth and my future. If there is something real here, something that belongs to me and not to anyone else's expectations, I want to claim it fully. Mirella nodded slowly, something like approval flickering across her weathered features. Then we shall proceed, but carefully, and with appropriate preparation. This is not something to rush into carelessly. Over the following days, Mirella worked with Elena to prepare for the ritual, teaching her breathing techniques meant to help her remain calm and centered during the process, explaining as much as she could about what to expect, though she readily admitted that much of the specific experience would depend on Elena's own unique circumstances and whatever power, if any, lay dormant within her. Kale remained close throughout the preparation, his presence a steady, reassuring constant that Elena found herself relying on more than she had initially expected. Their evening conversations continued as well, though increasingly, the topic shifted from simple getting-to-know-each-other discussions toward deeper reflections on power, responsibility, and what it might mean if Mirella's suspicions proved accurate. "If this is true," Elena said one evening, staring into the fire as they sat together in comfortable silence, "everything changes, does it not? I would no longer simply be someone recovering from a painful rejection. I would be someone with claims and responsibilities that extend far beyond anything I ever imagined for myself." "Perhaps," Cale acknowledged, "but you would still be the same person underneath whatever titles or claims might eventually attach themselves to you. Power does not automatically change who someone fundamentally is, not unless they allow it to." "Does that worry you?" Elena asked, glancing at him. "The possibility that I might become someone with power and influence that rivals your own, or even exceeds it?" Cale considered the question seriously, as he always did, rather than offering a quick, dismissive answer simply to reassure her. "I would be lying if I said the political implications had not crossed my mind. Power shifts of this magnitude rarely happen without consequence, and I would be foolish not to consider how it might affect Nightspire, and everyone under my protection here." He paused, his amber eyes meeting hers directly. "But no, it does not worry me in the way you might expect. Whatever power you might carry, I have watched you these past months. I have seen your character, your resilience, your genuine care for the people around you. Power in your hands would not become a danger to those you care about. If anything, it would become a shield, a tool used to protect rather than to dominate." Elena felt warmth spread through her chest at his words, a warmth entirely different from anything she had felt during her brief, doomed bond with Damon. This felt real, earned through months of genuine connection, rather than forced upon them by fate's arbitrary design. The night of the ritual arrived on the winter solstice, a date Mirella insisted carried particular significance for rituals of this nature, when the boundary between ordinary reality and deeper ancestral power grew naturally thinner. The ceremony took place in a clearing, deep within Nightspire's forest, illuminated by a circle of torches that Mirella and several other pack elders had carefully arranged, according to patterns from ancient texts. Elena knelt at the center of the circle, her breathing steady, despite the nervous energy coursing through her body. Cale stood just outside the circle's boundary, close enough to intervene if something went wrong, though Mirella had been clear that once the ritual began, interruption could prove more dangerous than allowing it to run its natural course. Mirella began chanting words, in an old language Elena did not recognize, her voice carrying a rhythmic, hypnotic quality that seemed to resonate through the clearing itself. The torches flickered in unison, their flames bending and swaying despite the absence of any wind. Elena felt a strange pressure building within her chest, growing steadily more intense as Mirella's chanting continued. Then, without warning, something inside her broke open. It did not hurt, not exactly, though the sensation was overwhelming in its intensity. Elena felt power flooding through her body, ancient and vast, as though a door long sealed shut had suddenly been thrown open, revealing a room far larger than she could have ever imagined existed within herself. Images flashed through her mind, fragments of memories that were not entirely her own, glimpses of a lineage stretching back generations, of a royal bloodline that had once held dominion over territories spanning far beyond anything modern packs could claim. She saw a great hall, unlike anything she had known in Silverfang, filled with representatives from dozens of different territories, all gathered beneath a single unified banner. She saw a coronation, ancient and solemn, a crown, placed upon the head of a woman, whose face bore an unmistakable resemblance to her own mother. She saw war, and loss, and a deliberate choice made generations ago to hide this bloodline, to bury its power deep within an unremarkable family line, protecting descendants from enemies who would have hunted down and eliminated any remaining claim to that ancient throne. When the visions finally faded, Elena found herself gasping for breath, kneeling in the snow, her entire body trembling with the aftermath of whatever power had just surged through her. Cale was there instantly, having crossed the circle's boundary the moment the ritual concluded, his strong arms wrapping around her, steadying her as her body threatened to collapse entirely. "I saw it," Elena managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I saw everything. The bloodline is real. It is mine." Mirella approached slowly, her expression a mixture of awe and solemnity. "The ancient royal line of Aurelius," she said quietly, "a bloodline thought lost for over 2 centuries, hidden away and protected through careful, deliberate concealment, and now, restored, awakening within you." Elena looked up at Kale, still trembling from the aftermath of the ritual, and found his amber eyes fixed on her with an expression she had never seen before, something reverent and protective all at once. "The bloodline that ruled before the great fracturing," he said quietly. "Before the territories split apart into the fragmented pack system we know today. If this is truly restored within you, Elena, you carry a claim that could unite territories that have remained divided for generations." The weight of this revelation settled over Elena slowly, enormous and undeniable. She was no longer simply a rejected mate who had found unexpected refuge in Nightspire territory. She was, potentially, the rightful heir to a throne that predated the very concept of Silverfang, of Nightspire, of every territory that currently divided these lands into competing, often hostile factions. "What happens now?" she asked, looking between Kale and Morella, uncertainty, and something like fear beginning to creep into her voice, as the full implications settled over her. "Now," Kale said, his voice steady and reassuring, despite the momentous nature of what had just occurred, "we help you understand and control this power. We help you decide what to do with this legacy, this claim that has been restored to you tonight. And whatever you decide, whatever path you choose to walk from here, know that you will not walk it alone." Elena felt tears sting her eyes, though this time they were not tears of grief or humiliation, as they had been the night Damon rejected her before their entire pack. These were tears of something closer to overwhelming possibility, of a future opening before her that she could never have imagined during her painful, isolated walk out of Silverfang's gates months earlier. Whatever lay ahead, whatever challenges and dangers her newly restored bloodline might bring, Elena finally allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Hope. Camille Rousseau had never been a woman who settled for comfortable positions when more powerful ones remained within reach. From the moment she secured her place beside Damon Kane, she had been quietly building a network of influence that extended well beyond the borders of Silverfang territory, cultivating relationships with allies from the eastern borderlands, where her own family held significant sway. What Damon did not fully understand, what he had never bothered to investigate closely enough to discover, was that Camille's ambitions had never been centered on him specifically. He had simply been the most convenient path toward the influence and territory she truly desired. "The northern trade routes remain a problem," Camille said one evening, seated across from Damon in his private study, a map of the surrounding territories spread across the table between them. "Silverfang's current agreements with the river settlements limit our access to the most profitable routes. If we were to renegotiate those terms, perhaps even pressure them into more favorable arrangements, our combined influence could expand significantly." Damon studied the map, frowning slightly. "Those agreements have been in place for generations. Renegotiating them without cause could damage relationships we have spent decades cultivating." "Relationships built on outdated terms serve no one," Camille countered smoothly. "Strong leaders understand when circumstances demand change, even if that change proves uncomfortable in the short term. Surely you do not wish to be remembered as an alpha, too timid to secure his people's prosperity." Damon's expression tightened at the implied criticism, exactly as Camille had intended. She had learned, over their years together, precisely which words would push him toward the decisions she favored, understanding his pride and his fear of appearing weak, far better than he likely understood these vulnerabilities within himself. Over the following weeks, Camille's influence steadily reshaped Silverfang's approach to its neighboring territories. Agreements that had maintained peace and stability for generations were renegotiated under pressure, sometimes aggressively, straining relationships that had once been cordial. Several of Damon's longtime advisors expressed concern about the direction these changes were taking, but Camille had grown skilled at positioning herself between Damon and anyone who might challenge her influence, ensuring dissenting voices rarely reached him, without her own commentary shaping how he received them. Elder Corwin questioned the wisdom of the river settlement negotiations again today, Camille mentioned casually one evening, watching Damon's reaction carefully. "I worry his judgment has grown clouded with age." Perhaps it is time to consider whether his continued presence on the council still serves Silverfang's best interests. It was a small suggestion, delivered with apparent reluctance, as though Camille herself found the idea distasteful even as she proposed it. But over months of similar suggestions, delivered with the same careful reluctance, Damon's counsel had gradually shifted, longtime advisors replaced by individuals more amenable to Camille's preferred direction, individuals who owed their positions increasingly to her influence rather than to Damon's own judgment. Damon told himself these changes represented necessary progress, that Camille's political instincts were simply sharper than those of advisors grown comfortable and complacent after years of peace. He did not allow himself to examine too closely how thoroughly his own authority had begun eroding beneath the surface of decisions that still bore his name, but increasingly reflected Camille's ambitions rather than his own judgment. It was only when reports began arriving of unrest among the river settlements, of trade disruptions and simmering resentment among territories that had once been reliable allies, that Damon began to feel the first stirrings of genuine unease. The Eastern Trading Post reported that 3 caravans were turned away this week, Damon said, reviewing reports late one evening. The river settlements are refusing to honor even the modified agreements now. This is becoming a significant problem. A temporary setback, Camille assured him, though something in her tone lacked its usual confident smoothness. These things require patience. Once they understand the benefits of stronger cooperation with Silverfang, they will come around. But the setbacks continued, and Damon found himself increasingly troubled by the growing hostility surrounding what had once been peaceful, stable relationships with neighboring territories. He began, cautiously and quietly, reviewing decisions made over the past months, decisions he had approved largely on Camille's counsel, and found himself troubled by patterns he had not previously noticed. Many of the aggressive renegotiations and territorial pressures Camille had championed seemed to benefit her own eastern borderland family disproportionately, opening trade advantages and territorial access that flowed toward her relatives, rather than genuinely strengthening Silverfang's position. What had been presented to him as strategies for Silverfang's prosperity increasingly looked, upon closer examination, like a systematic redirection of resources and influence toward Camille's own family interests. "I need to understand something," Damon said one evening, his tone carrying a wariness that had not been present in their conversations for years. "The trade concessions we secured from the northern settlement last month, the ones that gave your family's merchants exclusive access to the mountain pass routes. Explain to me again how that arrangement serves Silverfang's interests rather than simply your own family's." Camille's expression flickered, just for a moment, something calculating replacing her usual warmth, before she composed herself. "It serves both, obviously. My family's success naturally translates into stronger alliances for Silverfang, given our close relationship." "Does it?" Damon asked, his voice quieter now, more considering. "Or does it simply translate into wealth and influence for your family, while Silverfang absorbs the political consequences of increasingly hostile neighboring territories?" The conversation ended without resolution that night, but something had shifted between them, a crack forming in the foundation of trust Camille had spent years carefully constructing. Damon found himself, for the first time in longer than he cared to admit, genuinely questioning whether the choices he had made, choices that had cost him a fated bond with a woman he had cast aside without a second thought, had truly been worth their price. He thought of Elena more often than he wanted to acknowledge, wondering what had become of her after her banishment from Silverfang. Guilt gnawed at him in quiet moments, though pride kept him from voicing these doubts to anyone, including himself, not fully. It was during a tense council meeting, weeks later, that the fragile facade Camille had constructed finally began to crumble entirely. "We have received word from our contacts within the eastern borderlands," announced Elder Fenwick, one of the few original advisors who had managed to retain his council position, despite months of Camille's quiet maneuvering. "It appears the trade agreements benefiting Camille's family were negotiated using falsified authority, documents suggesting Silverfang's full endorsement, when in fact, several of these arrangements were never properly reviewed or approved by this council." The room fell silent, all eyes turning toward Damon, who felt something cold settle in his stomach as the implications of Fenwick's report sank in fully. "Explain," Damon said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Fenwick laid out documentation methodically, revealing a pattern of manipulation that had been building for years, long before Elena's rejection had even occurred. Camille had been systematically forging council approvals, exaggerating Damon's endorsement of various agreements, and redirecting significant Silverfang resources toward her own family's interests, all while presenting these actions to Damon as necessary strategic decisions made with full council support. Damon confronted Camille that same evening, the map of territories that had once symbolized their shared ambitions, now feeling like evidence of her betrayal spread across the table between them. "You forged council approvals," Damon said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You manipulated agreements to benefit your family at Silverfang's expense, and you did it while I trusted you completely." Camille's carefully maintained composure finally cracked, something colder and more calculating emerging beneath the warmth she had projected for years. "You wanted a queen who could expand Silverfang's influence, Damon. That is exactly what I did. If the methods proved more aggressive than your council preferred, the results still would have benefited Silverfang eventually, once the surrounding territories adjusted to the new arrangements. You lied to me, repeatedly, for years." "I did what was necessary," Camille said, her voice hardening. "You chose me over a fated bond, remember? You chose ambition and strategic advantage over some untested mystical connection to an unremarkable girl from a minor bloodline. Do not pretend now that you expected gentleness and honesty in return for that choice." The words landed with brutal precision, forcing Damon to confront the full weight of what his rejection of Elena had truly cost him, not simply in terms of a broken bond, but in terms of the fundamentally flawed judgment that had led him toward Camille in the first place, toward years of manipulation he had been too blind, or too proud, to recognize until the damage had grown severe enough to threaten Silverfang's very stability. "Get out," Damon said quietly. "Whatever remains of our arrangement ends tonight." Camille's expression grew cold, calculating. "You cannot simply dismiss me, Damon. My family's alliances run deeper into Silverfang's current trade infrastructure than you likely realize. Removing me now would create chaos that could genuinely threaten the stability you claim to care so much about." Despite her threats, Damon held firm, and within days, news of Camille's manipulation and the political chaos it had caused began spreading beyond Silverfang's borders, reaching territories that had grown increasingly hostile toward the pack over recent months. It was during this period of growing crisis that reports began reaching Silverfang of a woman appearing in the northern territories, a woman connected somehow to Nightspire's feared Alpha, rumored to carry power and lineage unlike anything seen in generations. Reports were fragmented, uncertain, filtered through several layers of rumor and exaggeration before reaching Damon's ears. But something about the descriptions, something about the timing and the location, sent an uneasy, unmistakable recognition through him. Elena. It had to be Elena. Damon found himself standing at the window of his private study late one night, staring out at the darkened territory he ruled, a territory now fractured and unstable due to choices he had made in pursuit of a partnership that had proven to be built entirely on manipulation and lies. He thought of the woman he had rejected, humiliated in front of his entire pack, cast out into dangerous wilderness, with nothing but a small pack of supplies and no protection whatsoever. He thought of the growing rumors surrounding her survival and apparent rise within Nightspire's territory, rumors that suggested she had found not simply refuge, but genuine strength and purpose, in the very place his own pack had once dismissed as nothing more than a source of frightening bedtime stories. For the first time since that fateful night in the Silverfang Hall, Damon allowed himself to fully confront the magnitude of his mistake, though whether that recognition had come too late to matter, whether any path remained toward correcting the damage his choices had caused, remained an uncertain and troubling question he was not yet prepared to answer. Spring arrived in Nightspire territory with a gentleness that felt almost symbolic to Elena, the harsh winter finally giving way to warmer days, and the slow, steady return of green life across the forest that had once nearly claimed her existence. In the months since the ritual that had revealed her hidden bloodline, Elena had thrown herself into understanding what it truly meant to carry the legacy of the ancient royal line of Aurelis, working closely with Mirella to uncover as much history as remained available about her ancestors and the territories they had once governed. The power that had awakened within her during the ritual had not remained dormant. It manifested increasingly in her physical abilities, her reflexes and strength, surpassing what months of ordinary training could have produced on their own. But more significantly, it manifested in an intuitive understanding she found herself developing, a natural grasp of leadership, diplomacy, and strategic thinking that seemed to exist within her almost instinctively, as though generations of accumulated royal wisdom had somehow been passed down through her restored bloodline. "You are ready," Morella told her one afternoon, as they sat together, reviewing old maps that detailed the territories once unified under the Aurelis banner centuries earlier. "The power has settled fully within you now. What remains is deciding how you intend to use it." Elena studied the maps carefully, tracing the borders of territories that had once been unified, territories that now existed as fragmented, often hostile packs scattered across the northern and eastern regions. Silverfang's current borders occupied only a small portion of what had once been Aurelis land, alongside dozens of other territories, including Nightspire itself, all fractured pieces of what had once been a single, cohesive kingdom. "I do not know if unification is something I truly want to pursue," Elena admitted honestly. "The idea feels overwhelming, and I am not certain I possess the wisdom or experience necessary to govern territories this vast, even if my bloodline technically grants me the claim to attempt it. Wisdom often develops through the process of leadership itself, rather than existing fully formed beforehand," Morella said. "But the choice remains entirely yours, Elena. No one, myself included, would force this responsibility upon you if you genuinely do not wish to pursue it." Elena's gaze drifted toward the window, where she could see Kale in the distance, overseeing training exercises in the yard below, his commanding presence evident even from this distance. Their relationship had deepened significantly over the months since the ritual, evolving from careful friendship into something neither of them had explicitly named yet, though the warmth and connection between them had become an undeniable, steady presence in Elena's daily life. "What does Kale think I should do?" Elena asked. "Alpha Kale has been careful not to influence your decision," Morella said. "He has told me directly that whatever choice you make, he intends to support it fully, without pressuring you toward any particular path. I believe that restraint comes from genuine respect for your autonomy, something I suspect you have not always received from others in your life." Elena thought of Damon, of the way he had made decisions about her future without ever truly consulting her wishes, culminating in the devastating rejection that had ultimately, unexpectedly, led her toward this entirely different life. The contrast between his approach and Kale's careful respect for her independence could not have been more striking. That evening, Elena sought Kale out, finding him near the training yard as the sun began setting, casting long shadows across the settlement that had become, over the past year, more truly home to her than Silverfang had ever felt, even before her rejection. "I have made a decision," she told him, watching his expression carefully as she spoke. "About the bloodline, about what I intend to do with this legacy, Morella helped me uncover." Kale's attention remained fully fixed on her, patient and attentive, giving no indication of what response he hoped to hear. "I am listening." "I want to pursue unification," Elena said, the words feeling both terrifying and right as she spoke them aloud for the first time. "Not through conquest or force, not in the way ancient territories were sometimes unified through violence and domination, but through genuine alliance building, through demonstrating that unity under a fair and just leadership could benefit all the fractured territories more than their current isolated, often hostile independence." "That is an ambitious undertaking," Kale said carefully. "Many of these territories have existed independently for generations. Convincing them to accept unified leadership, even leadership with a legitimate ancient claim, will not be simple or without resistance." "I know," Elena said, "but I believe it is the right path, both for these territories collectively and for what I want my own life and legacy to represent. I do not want to simply hide this power, this claim, out of fear of the challenges involved in pursuing it fully." Something shifted in Kale's expression, pride and admiration mixing with a warmth that had grown increasingly familiar over their months together. "Then you will have my full support, and Nightspire's full resources, in whatever way you need them." Even though unification could ultimately mean Nightspire becomes part of a larger, unified territory, rather than remaining fully independent under your sole authority? Elena asked, wanting to be certain he understood the full implications of what she was proposing. Elena, Cale said, moving closer, his amber eyes steady and sincere. I did not begin caring for you because of political advantage or territorial ambition. I have watched you grow from someone nearly broken by cruel rejection into someone with genuine strength, wisdom, and compassion, qualities that would make you an exceptional leader for territories far beyond what any single pack currently claims. If your path leads toward unification, I want to walk that path alongside you, not because it benefits Nightspire strategically, but because I believe in who you have become and what you could accomplish. Elena felt tears building in her eyes, though these were tears of overwhelming gratitude rather than pain, so different from the tears she had shed during her rejection so many months earlier. I care for you too, she said quietly, the words feeling both vulnerable and entirely natural. Not because fate decided it should be so, the way it tried to force a bond between myself and Damon that never truly belonged, but because of everything you have shown me, everything we have built together through genuine choice rather than obligation. Cale reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands, his expression carrying a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the fierce reputation that had once made Elena so afraid of Nightspire territory before she ever set foot within its borders. Then let us build this future together, Elena. Whatever challenges unification brings, whatever resistance we encounter from territories unwilling to relinquish their independence, we will face it as partners, choosing each other freely, every single day, rather than relying on some predetermined bond neither of us truly controls. Their first kiss that evening felt entirely different from anything Elena had experienced during her brief, doomed connection with Damon. There was no forced magical pull compelling them together, no mystical bond demanding their union regardless of genuine compatibility or choice. There was only two people who had grown to know and care for each other deeply, choosing, freely and deliberately, to build a future together. Over the following weeks, word of Elena's restored bloodline and her intentions toward unification began spreading beyond Nightspire's borders, carried initially through careful diplomatic channels that Cale and Morella helped establish with neighboring territories, known for their relative openness toward new alliances. The response was mixed, as expected. Some smaller territories, long weary of constant tension and competition among fractured packs, expressed cautious interest in exploring what unified leadership might offer. Others, particularly larger, more established territories accustomed to independent authority, responded with skepticism or outright hostility toward the idea. Silverfang's response has been notably absent from the diplomatic communications we have received, Cale observed one evening, reviewing correspondence that had arrived from various territories over recent weeks. Given everything happening there currently, with the political instability surrounding Camille's exposed manipulation, I suspect Damon has more immediate concerns occupying his attention. Elena felt a complicated mixture of emotions at the mention of her former pack and the man who had once rejected her so publicly. She had heard, through various channels, about the growing chaos within Silverfang, about Camille's exposed deception, and the resulting political instability threatening the pack's previously stable position among neighboring territories. Do you think he regrets it? Elena asked. His decision, I mean. Rejecting the bond, choosing Camille instead. I imagine he does, given everything that has unfolded since, Cale said carefully. But regret does not undo the choices already made, nor does it obligate you to feel any particular way about his current circumstances. Elena considered this, surprised to find that thinking about Damon's situation stirred far less emotional intensity than she might have expected even a few months earlier. The wound of his rejection, once so raw and devastating, had gradually healed over her time in Nightspire, replaced by a life and purpose that felt genuinely her own, built through choice and connection rather than forced obligation. I do not wish him harm, Elena said finally, but I also no longer feel the need to seek his approval or validation in any way. Whatever happens within Silverfang moving forward, my path lies elsewhere now, alongside people who have chosen to support and care for me freely. As spring gave way to early summer, Elena's diplomatic efforts continued expanding, with several smaller territories formally expressing interest in exploring alliance under her proposed unification. Morella worked tirelessly alongside her, drawing upon ancient historical records to help structure proposed governance frameworks that balanced unified leadership with meaningful local autonomy, addressing many of the concerns that skeptical territories had raised during initial discussions. Kale remained a steady, essential presence throughout this process, his military strength and established reputation lending significant credibility to Elena's efforts, even as he consistently ensured that decisions and leadership remained genuinely hers, rather than allowing his own established authority to overshadow her emerging role. It was during a diplomatic gathering with representatives from several interested territories, held in Nightspire's main hall, that Elena first truly began to feel the full weight and possibility of what she was building. Representatives from 5 different territories sat together, discussing terms and frameworks for potential unification, engaging in genuine, productive dialogue, rather than the tense political maneuvering that had characterized so many interactions among fractured packs in recent generations. Your approach differs significantly from typical unification efforts throughout our history, one representative observed, an older woman from a northern territory that had remained fiercely independent for generations. Most attempts at unifying fractured territories have relied on force or coercion. You are proposing something built on genuine consent and mutual benefit instead, because force and coercion ultimately produce fragile, resentful alliances that eventually collapse under their own instability, Elena replied. I want to build something lasting, something that genuinely serves all territories involved, not simply expand my own authority at others' expense. The gathering concluded with tentative agreements from 3 of the 5 territories present, agreements that would require further negotiation and refinement, but represented genuine progress toward the unified future Elena envisioned. As representatives departed and the hall gradually emptied, Kale approached Elena, pride evident in his expression as he studied her. You are becoming exactly the leader I always sensed you had the potential to be, he said quietly. Even from that very first night, when I found you nearly lost in the forest, there was something in you, some quiet strength that spoke of far greater potential than your circumstances at the time suggested. Elena smiled, leaning into his embrace, as exhaustion from the long day of diplomatic discussions finally caught up with her. I could not have discovered that potential without you, she said. Without Nightspire's protection, without Morella's guidance, without your unwavering support throughout everything we have built together these past months. We built it together, Kale corrected gently. And we will continue building it together, whatever challenges still lie ahead. Neither of them could have fully anticipated, in that peaceful moment, following a successful diplomatic gathering, just how significant and dramatic the challenges still awaiting them would ultimately prove to be. As word of Elena's growing influence and restored bloodline continued spreading throughout the fractured territories, eventually reaching ears in Silverfang, that would set in motion a confrontation neither Elena nor Damon could avoid forever. The full scope of Camille's betrayal became impossible to contain within Silverfang's borders alone. What had begun as forged council approvals and misdirected trade agreements had, over years of careful manipulation, created a web of obligations and hostilities that now threatened to unravel entirely, dragging Silverfang toward genuine conflict with several neighboring territories that had grown increasingly resentful of the aggressive tactics Camille had championed in Damon's name. Damon called an emergency council session, the first he had led without Camille's influence shaping the discussion in months, determined to understand the full extent of the damage and chart a path toward stabilizing his territory before the growing hostility erupted into open conflict. The River Settlement Alliance has formally severed all trade agreements, Elder Fenwick reported grimly, laying out the latest correspondence for the assembled council. They cite repeated bad faith negotiations and forged authorizations as justification. 2 other territories have expressed similar grievances, and there are concerning reports that some of these territories may be considering coordinated action against Silverfang. Coordinated action meaning what, precisely? Damon asked, though the tightness in his voice suggested he already understood the grim implications. Military action, Fenwick said bluntly. If Silverfang cannot demonstrate genuine commitment to repairing these damaged relationships, several territories appear prepared to consider more aggressive measures to protect their own interests, potentially including direct conflict. The council chamber fell into tense silence, the weight of this possibility settling heavily over everyone present. Damon felt the full magnitude of his failures pressing down on him, failures that traced back, ultimately, to that fateful night, when he had rejected a fated bond in favor of a woman whose true intentions he had failed to recognize until the damage had grown severe enough to threaten his entire pack's survival. What options remain available to us? Damon asked, forcing himself to focus on solutions rather than dwelling further on regrets that would not undo the current crisis. Limited ones, Fenwick admitted. We could attempt direct diplomatic outreach to each affected territory individually, offering genuine concessions and reparations for the damage caused. It would require significant sacrifice on Silverfang's part, potentially including territorial or resource concessions that would weaken our position considerably. But it may be our best path toward avoiding outright conflict. And if individual diplomacy proves insufficient? Damon asked. Fenwick hesitated before answering. There have been rumors, Alpha, of a growing alliance forming among several northern and eastern territories, centered around a figure claiming legitimate ancient royal lineage. Some reports suggest this figure has been actively working to build genuine, consensual alliances among fractured territories, offering an alternative model of unified leadership that several territories have found appealing, given the current instability plaguing traditional pack politics. Damon's jaw tightened, already suspecting the identity behind these rumors before Fenwick continued. The figure in question is reportedly connected closely to Nightspire's Alpha, Fenwick continued. Sources suggest she may in fact be a former Silverfang pack member, one who was rejected from a fated bond approximately a year ago, and subsequently found refuge within Nightspire territory. Whispers rippled through the assembled council members, several of them turning to study Damon's reaction with poorly concealed curiosity. He forced his expression to remain neutral, though internally, the confirmation of what he had already suspected settled over him with heavy, complicated weight. Elena, building alliances, claiming ancient royal lineage, working alongside Cale Ashford, the very Alpha whose territory Damon's own pack had long viewed with suspicion and fear. This changes our diplomatic calculations significantly, Damon said carefully, forcing himself to think strategically, despite the personal complications this revelation introduced. If territories are genuinely considering alliance with this unified leadership movement rather than pursuing individual conflict against Silverfang, our approach toward repairing relationships needs to account for that broader context. Some council members have suggested reaching out directly to this emerging alliance, Fenwick said carefully. Given the personal history involved, however, such outreach would require careful, deliberate handling. Damon considered this suggestion for a long moment, the pride that had guided so many of his previous decisions warring against the pragmatic recognition that Silverfang's survival might genuinely depend on finding some path toward reconciliation, however uncomfortable that path might prove personally. I will consider our options, Damon said finally. But first, I believe direct communication is necessary to understand precisely what this emerging alliance represents and whether genuine partnership remains possible given our history. Over the following days, Damon wrestled with how best to approach this communication, ultimately deciding that a personal visit, rather than formal diplomatic correspondence, would demonstrate the genuine sincerity necessary to overcome the significant personal history complicating any potential reconciliation. He traveled with a small, unarmed escort toward Nightspire territory, a journey that felt entirely different from any diplomatic mission he had previously undertaken, weighted with personal history and uncertainty in ways that made him genuinely apprehensive, despite his considerable experience navigating difficult political negotiations throughout his years as Alpha. Word of his approach reached Nightspire well before he arrived, Cale's border patrols reporting the unusual sight of a small Silverfang delegation traveling under a flag of peaceful intent. Elena received the news with a complicated mixture of emotions, surprise and wariness, mingling with something she could not quite identify, some lingering curiosity about how the man who had once rejected her so publicly might have changed in the years since their painful separation. You do not have to meet with him if you would prefer not to, Cale told her, as they discussed how to handle the unexpected visit. I can manage the diplomatic reception myself, or we could decline the meeting entirely, given the circumstances. No, Elena said, after a moment of consideration. I want to meet with him. Whatever happens between Silverfang and our alliance moving forward, I do not wish to avoid this conversation out of fear or lingering resentment. I have built a life and purpose here that no longer depends on his approval or validation. I can face this meeting from a position of genuine strength rather than old wounds. Kale studied her carefully, pride evident in his expression at her steady resolve. Then I will be present alongside you, as your partner, though I will let you lead this conversation as you see fit. Damon arrived at Nightspire's border 3 days later, escorted by Kale's patrol toward the main settlement, his expression carefully controlled despite the evident tension he carried throughout the journey. The territory he encountered bore no resemblance to the frightening rumors that had long circulated within Silverfang, instead revealing a thriving, well-organized settlement that immediately challenged whatever preconceptions he had carried into this visit. The meeting took place in Nightspire's main hall, Elena seated beside Kale at the head of the gathering, her posture carrying a quiet confidence and authority that struck Damon immediately, so different from the young woman he remembered from that fateful night nearly a year earlier. She no longer carried herself as someone uncertain of her place or value. She carried herself as a leader, someone whose authority commanded genuine respect from everyone around her. "Elena," Damon said, his voice carrying genuine surprise, despite the reports that had prepared him for this transformation. "You look different, stronger." "A great deal has changed in the past year," Elena replied evenly, her tone giving away little of the complicated emotions this reunion stirred within her. "I imagine you did not travel here simply to comment on my appearance, however. What brings you to Nightspire territory, Damon?" Damon took a steadying breath, aware of the weight this conversation carried, not simply for immediate diplomatic purposes but for confronting the personal history that had led toward this uncomfortable, unavoidable moment. "Silverfang finds itself in a precarious position," he said honestly, deciding that transparency offered the best path forward given the circumstances. "The relationship I pursued instead of our fated bond proved to be built on manipulation and deception. Camille forged agreements, damaged relationships with numerous territories, and left Silverfang facing potential conflict as a result of choices I made, choices that trusted her judgment over the responsibilities I owed to my own pack, and frankly, over the responsibilities I owed to you as well." Elena listened carefully, her expression giving little away, though Kale's protective attentiveness beside her did not go unnoticed by Damon. "I am not seeking your forgiveness for how I treated you," Damon continued. "I understand that whatever damage I caused that night cannot simply be undone through belated acknowledgement. But I am hoping, given the reports of your work building genuine, consensual alliances among fractured territories, that Silverfang might still find a path toward reconciliation with the territories I have damaged, whether through your direct involvement or through whatever guidance you might be willing to offer, given the current circumstances." Elena considered his words carefully, weighing the genuine vulnerability in his admission against the lingering awareness of how deeply his rejection had once wounded her. "The alliance I am building is centered on genuine partnership, mutual respect, and consensual leadership," she said finally. "It is not built to punish territories for past mistakes, nor is it built to reward manipulation or deception, as Camille clearly practiced during her time influencing Silverfang's policies. If Silverfang genuinely wishes to pursue reconciliation with damaged territories and eventual partnership within this broader alliance, that path remains available. But it will require genuine accountability, meaningful reparations to territories harmed by recent actions, and a demonstrated commitment to the kind of fair, consensual governance this alliance is built upon." "I understand," Damon said, "and I am prepared to pursue whatever genuine accountability and reparations prove necessary to repair the damage caused." The conversation continued for several more hours, moving from initial personal tension toward genuine, productive diplomatic discussion about the specific steps Silverfang would need to take to begin repairing relationships with damaged territories and potentially pursue eventual partnership within the broader alliance Elena continued building. By the conversation's conclusion, a tentative framework had been established, one that would require significant effort and genuine commitment from Silverfang moving forward, but which offered a realistic path away from the potential conflict that had threatened the pack's stability. As Damon prepared to depart Nightspire territory, he found himself pausing before Elena one final time, something he needed to say, weighing heavily on him, despite the productive diplomatic progress they had achieved. "I am truly sorry," he said quietly, meeting her gaze directly, "for how I treated you that night, for the humiliation and abandonment you suffered because of my choices. Whatever path our territory's relationship takes moving forward, I wanted you to hear that acknowledgement directly, not simply as part of diplomatic negotiations, but as genuine, personal regret for the pain I caused you." Elena studied him for a long moment, searching for any trace of manipulation or calculated strategy behind his words, finding instead what appeared to be genuine, humbled sincerity. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "I have found peace with what happened, Damon. Genuine peace, built through the life and purpose I have discovered here in Nightspire. I do not carry the anger I once did, but I appreciate hearing this acknowledgement nonetheless." Damon nodded, something like genuine relief crossing his features, before he turned to depart, his delegation beginning the journey back toward Silverfang territory, with considerably more hope for their pack's future than they had carried during their arrival. Cale waited until Damon's delegation had fully departed, before turning to Elena, studying her expression carefully. "How do you feel?" he asked gently. Elena considered the question seriously, taking stock of the complicated emotions this unexpected reunion had stirred within her. "Lighter," she said finally, surprised by her own honesty. "I did not realize how much weight I was still carrying from that night, until I heard him acknowledge it directly. I think I can finally, fully let go of whatever remained of that old pain." Cale pulled her close, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You have built something remarkable here, Elena. Whatever pain the past caused you, look at what has grown from it. A genuine alliance, built on fairness and mutual respect, expanding steadily across territories that have suffered too long under fractured, often hostile independence." Elena smiled, leaning into his embrace, genuine peace settling over her, as she considered the path that had led her from that devastating rejection toward the strength, purpose, and love she had found within Nightspire territory. Whatever challenges still remained in building the unified alliance she envisioned, she faced them now from a position of genuine strength, surrounded by people who had chosen to support and love her freely, without the forced obligation of fate's arbitrary design. The road ahead remained long, with numerous territories still requiring careful diplomatic outreach before genuine unification could be achieved. But for the first time since her rejection, nearly a year earlier, Elena felt fully confident in the path stretching before her, certain that whatever challenges remained, she possessed both the strength and the genuine support necessary to overcome them. The months following Damon's visit to Nightspire brought steady, remarkable progress toward the unified alliance Elena had worked so tirelessly to build. Silverfang, true to Damon's word, pursued genuine reparations with the territories damaged by Camille's earlier manipulation, offering meaningful concessions and demonstrating consistent good faith that gradually rebuilt trust with several previously hostile neighboring packs. Word of Damon's transformed approach, and his public acknowledgement of past mistakes, spread throughout the region, lending additional credibility to the broader unification movement. Elena continued expanding. Camille, stripped of her influence and exposed publicly for her manipulation, fled Silverfang territory entirely, seeking refuge among distant eastern relatives after her reputation had been thoroughly destroyed throughout the region. Few mourned her departure, and Damon found himself, in the months that followed, gradually rebuilding Silverfang's stability through more careful, considered leadership than he had demonstrated during the years he had allowed Camille's ambitions to guide his decisions. Elena's alliance, meanwhile, continued growing steadily. Territory after territory, drawn by the genuine promise of fair, consensual governance, rather than the coercive unification that ancient history had often produced, began formally joining what people throughout the region increasingly referred to simply as the Aurelis Alliance, honoring the ancient bloodline that had provided the initial foundation for this remarkable unification effort. By the time autumn arrived again, nearly 18 months after Elena had first stumbled, wounded and abandoned, into Nightspire's forest, 12 different territories had formally joined the alliance, including, eventually, a fully reformed Silverfang, which Damon had guided through the difficult but ultimately successful process of rebuilding trust and demonstrating genuine commitment to the fair governance principles Elena's alliance represented. 12 territories, Morella said one evening, reviewing the latest formal alliance documentation with evident satisfaction. More than has been unified under a single banner since the original Aurelis kingdom fractured centuries ago. This is truly remarkable progress, Elena, achieved in far less time than I ever anticipated when we first began this journey together. Elena studied the documentation herself, still finding it somewhat difficult to fully process the scope of what had been accomplished since that devastating night of her rejection, when she had believed her life essentially over, her future reduced to nothing beyond survival in unfamiliar, hostile wilderness. It would not have been possible without everyone's support, Elena said, glancing toward Kale, who stood nearby reviewing separate reports related to the Alliance's growing military coordination efforts. Yours, Kale's, the countless representatives from each territory, who chose to trust this vision, despite understandable skepticism, given history's difficult precedents. You built something genuinely remarkable, Kale said, setting aside his reports to join the conversation. Your leadership, your genuine commitment to fairness rather than domination, that convinced territory after territory to join freely rather than through coercion. This achievement belongs to you, Elena, whatever support the rest of us provided along the way. As the alliance continued solidifying, discussions naturally turned toward formal recognition of Elena's leadership role, discussions that had been quietly developing among the various territorial representatives for several months, as trust and stability within the alliance continued growing. The representatives have reached consensus, announced a delegate from one of the northern territories during a formal alliance gathering held in Nightspire's main hall, now expanded significantly to accommodate the growing number of representatives regularly attending alliance discussions. We believe formal coronation, recognizing Elena's leadership as rightful heir to the restored Aurelis throne, would provide appropriate structure and stability for our continued unified governance moving forward. Elena felt a familiar mixture of overwhelming responsibility and quiet determination settle over her, as representatives from each of the 12 allied territories voiced their support for this formal recognition. The idea of formal coronation, of officially claiming the ancient throne her restored bloodline entitled her to, still felt somewhat surreal, even after 18 months of steady progress toward exactly this outcome. I want to be certain this reflects genuine consensus, rather than simply momentum carrying us toward an outcome not everyone has fully considered, Elena said carefully, addressing the assembled representatives. This is not a decision I wish to rush into, without ensuring every territory feels genuinely comfortable with formal unification under a single recognized leadership structure. Discussion continued for several more hours, each territorial representative given full opportunity to voice questions, concerns, or reservations about the proposed coronation and the governance framework that would follow. By the discussion's conclusion, however, consensus remained clear and genuine. 12 territories, united in their support for Elena's formal coronation as rightful sovereign of the restored Aurelis kingdom. The coronation was scheduled for the winter solstice, exactly 2 years after the ritual that had first revealed Elena's hidden bloodline within Nightspire's forest clearing. The symbolism felt appropriate to everyone involved, marking the transformation from that pivotal moment of revelation toward the full realization of everything that revelation had ultimately made possible. Preparations for the coronation consumed the following weeks, representatives from each allied territory traveling toward Nightspire, which had been selected as the location for this historic ceremony, given its central role throughout Elena's journey, from rejected mate toward unified sovereign. The settlement transformed steadily as preparations progressed, decorations and ceremonial structures rising throughout the territory, in anticipation of the historic gathering soon to unfold. Damon arrived among the Silverfang delegation, his role within the ceremony carefully considered, given the complicated history between himself and Elena. Rather than any position of prominence, he had specifically requested to attend simply as one representative among many, genuinely humbled by how thoroughly Elena's journey had transformed, not simply her own life, but the broader political landscape of the entire region. I never could have imagined this outcome, Damon admitted to Elena during a quiet moment before the formal ceremony began, watching as final preparations continued throughout the transformed settlement around them. That night, I rejected our bond. I believed I was choosing strategic advantage, political strength. I could not have been more wrong about where genuine strength and leadership would ultimately be found. Everything happens as it needs to, I suppose, Elena said, no longer carrying any lingering bitterness toward the man whose rejection had, however painfully, ultimately set her on this remarkable path. I do not know if I would change anything now, even if given the choice, given everything that rejection ultimately led me toward discovering about myself and my own capabilities. Damon nodded, genuine respect evident in his expression. Silverfang is honored to stand among the territories recognizing your leadership, Elena. Whatever mistakes I made regarding our personal history, I am genuinely grateful for the opportunity to be part of what you have built here. As the winter solstice finally arrived, representatives from all 12 allied territories gathered within Nightspire's expanded main hall, joined by pack members from throughout the region who had traveled to witness this historic ceremony. Elena stood at the center of the hall, dressed in ceremonial garments that Mirella had helped design, incorporating traditional Aurelis symbolism alongside more contemporary elements, reflecting the genuinely consensual, modern alliance she had built. Mirella led the formal ceremony, her voice carrying the same rhythmic, ancient quality that had characterized the ritual nearly 2 years earlier, when Elena's bloodline had first been revealed. Representatives from each allied territory came forward in turn, formally pledging their continued support and partnership under Elena's unified leadership, the weight and significance of each pledge building steadily as the ceremony progressed. Kale stood beside Elena throughout the entire ceremony, not simply as her partner, but as an equal participant in the leadership structure they had built together. Nightspire itself, formally recognized as a founding territory within the broader alliance, with Kale's own governance role clearly defined and respected within the new unified framework. When the moment finally arrived for the formal crowning, Mirella lifted an ancient crown, one that had been carefully restored, based on historical records and fragments, discovered throughout months of research into the original Aurelis kingdom's history. The crown itself was elegant rather than ostentatious, silver metalwork woven with deep blue stones that seemed to catch and reflect the torchlight throughout the hall. By the restored bloodline of Aurelis, by the genuine consent of 12 unified territories, and by the demonstrated commitment to fair, consensual leadership shown throughout these past 2 years, Mirella announced, her voice carrying clearly throughout the silent, attentive hall, I formally crown Elena Voss as sovereign of the restored Aurelis alliance, queen of every territory freely choosing unity under her leadership. The crown settled onto Elena's head, and the hall erupted into genuine, enthusiastic celebration. Representatives and pack members alike voicing their support and approval for the leader they had chosen to unite behind, not through coercion or forced obligation, but through genuine trust, earned steadily over 2 remarkable years of demonstrated fairness and dedication. Elena stood at the center of this celebration, tears of genuine joy building in her eyes as she considered the extraordinary journey that had led her toward this moment. From a devastating public rejection that had left her believing her life essentially over, through near-death survival in unfamiliar wilderness, through the discovery of hidden power and ancient legacy she never could have anticipated, toward this remarkable culmination, surrounded by genuine allies who had chosen to support her freely throughout every step of this journey. Kale took her hand as the celebration continued around them, his amber eyes filled with pride and love as he studied her. Queen Elena, he said softly, testing the title with evident satisfaction. It suits you remarkably well. We built this together, Elena reminded him, echoing words he had spoken to her many months earlier. Whatever title I now carry, this achievement belongs to everyone who chose to support this vision, especially you. From that very first night you found me nearly lost in the forest. I simply provided support, Kale said. You provided the vision, the strength, and the genuine wisdom necessary to transform that support into everything we have built here today. As celebration continued throughout Nightspire settlement, late into the winter solstice night, Elena found herself reflecting on the remarkable transformation her life had undergone over these past 2 years. The woman who had once believed her worth, defined entirely by a fated bond that ultimately proved worthless, rejected without hesitation in favor of manipulation and false ambition, had discovered instead a strength, purpose, and genuine love, built through her own choices, her own resilience, and the freely given support of people who valued her, not because fate demanded it, but because they had witnessed and come to deeply respect who she genuinely was. Damon watched the celebration from among the Silverfang delegation, genuine happiness for Elena's remarkable achievement, mixing with quiet acknowledgement of everything his own poor judgment had cost him personally. even as Silverfang itself had ultimately benefited from the broader stability and prosperity that Elena's unified alliance now offered throughout the region. Whatever regrets lingered from his own choices, Damon recognized clearly, watching Elena stand crowned and celebrated among genuine allies who had chosen to support her freely, that some paths, once chosen, could never truly be reversed. Elena's remarkable journey from rejected mate toward unified sovereign stood as undeniable proof that genuine strength, wisdom, and leadership could emerge from even the most painful circumstances, transforming devastating rejection into the foundation for something far greater than any forced, fated bond could have ever produced. As the celebration finally began winding down in the deep hours of the winter solstice night, Elena stood beside Kale near the edge of the gathering, watching representatives from 12 different territories mingling together in genuine camaraderie, a unified alliance built not through conquest or coercion, but through demonstrated fairness, patience, and unwavering commitment to doing what was genuinely right for all people involved. "What comes next?" Kale asked quietly, as they watched the celebration continue around them. Elena considered the question, thinking of the significant work still remaining, the continued governance challenges that unifying 12 previously independent territories would inevitably present, the ongoing responsibility of maintaining the trust and genuine consent that had made this remarkable achievement possible in the first place. "Whatever comes next," Elena said, taking Kale's hand and leaning into his steady, comforting presence, "we face it together, choosing each other, and this vision freely, every single day, just as we have from the very beginning." The winter solstice moon shone brightly overhead, illuminating the settlement where Elena's remarkable journey had truly begun nearly 2 years earlier, a journey that had transformed devastating rejection into genuine triumph, proving beyond any doubt that true partnership, chosen freely and nurtured through genuine care and respect, would always outshine whatever destiny fate alone attempted to impose.